In the dead hours of night, when the church bells fall silent and only the wind moves through the trees, a darker story stirs. It is the story of whispered bargains, of forbidden prayers said backwards, of human souls bartered for power. For centuries, Europe trembled at the idea that ordinary neighbors could slip away from their beds and kneel before the devil himself. They called it witchcraft. They called it heresy. But beneath the bonfires and the sermons lay a deeper question. Did these pacts ever exist, or were they born of fear, power, and imagination? From the first rumors of midnight gatherings to the confessions extracted under torture, from possession to forbidden worship, we will follow the paper trail of one of history's most enduring accusations. And we will ask, what happens when belief in the devil becomes more powerful than any spell? To understand how witchcraft and the devil became inseparable in Europe, we have to enter a world where the devil himself was more than a symbol. He was a presence. During the early Middle Ages, Christian writers inherited a patchwork of older beliefs: fallen angels from Scripture, half-remembered pagan gods, Roman household spirits, and the desert demons of the Near East. For centuries, these beings were treated as a loose swarm of temptations and mischief makers. But by the 12th and 13th centuries, theologians began to do something new. They built a system. Sermons, penitentials, and handbooks arranged evil into a hierarchy, naming princes of hell, mapping sins to spirits, and drawing the outlines of an adversary as organized as heaven itself. In cloisters and candlelit libraries, monks copied grim treatises that spoke of the enemy moving invisibly through towns and fields. Scholars like Thomas Aquinas gave Satan cosmic reach, no longer just a tempter at the edge of Eden, but a commander of hosts, a strategist whose agents could infiltrate every household. Some chroniclers whispered of black masses on lonely hills, of unseen figures who slipped between worlds. Whether these stories were true or not, their effect was real. The devil was now everywhere, a chess master behind every misfortune. As Christendom expanded, its theologians looked at older local spirits, the horned forest guardian, the household elf, the healing woman's familiar, and redefined them as demons. The green gods of the wood became the devil's servants. The boundary between folklore and heresy shifted overnight. Suddenly, the helpful sprite in a barn or the charm whispered over a sick child could be interpreted as diabolical. This was not an accident. It was a campaign. In homilies and confession manuals, priests taught that unseen powers were not neutral. They were a test. By the 14th century, this way of thinking had soaked into law and imagination. To consort with any spirit outside the church's blessing, even for healing or fertility, might mean consorting with the devil himself. A folk charm could be recast as a compact. A night dance at midsummer could be renamed a witch's Sabbat. A peasant's whispered prayer to an old god might be written in an inquisitor's ledger as a pact with Satan. By redefining ancient spirits as demons, the church changed folklore forever, turning neighbors into suspects, charms into crimes, and every shadow into a possible emissary of hell. Once the devil had been named and enthroned as Christendom's great adversary, a new fear crept into sermons and chronicles. Not only could the enemy tempt you, he could strike a bargain with you. The idea of selling one's soul is older than Europe's witch trials. In medieval folktales, Traveling scholars and desperate peasants whispered of men who had struck private deals with spirits. A hunter might call upon a shadow at the crossroads for luck. A shepherd might chant a forbidden rhyme to gain sight of hidden treasure. In these early stories, the spirits were not always called devils. Sometimes they were simply the black man, the gentleman in the forest, or the old one. They offered knowledge, wealth, or vengeance. The price was vague: a drop of blood, a whispered oath, a promise at death. By the late Middle Ages, these folk bargains hardened into a single image: the devil himself extending his hand. Scholars wrote of necromancers, usually learned men, sometimes even clergy, who summoned demons through complicated rites in exchange for forbidden wisdom. These stories are the soil from which the Faust legend would later grow. When the German tale of Dr. Faustus began circulating in the 16th century, it gave Europe a template. A learned man hungry for power signs a contract in blood, gains years of pleasure and knowledge, and is finally dragged to hell. This narrative wasn't just entertainment, it was a warning written in fire. As these legends spread, theologians and inquisitors began to systematize them. The Malleus Maleficarum, published in 1487 by Heinrich Kramer, became the most infamous manual of witch hunting. It took scattered rumors of spirit bargains and turned them into doctrine. According to Kramer, every witch had, at some point, made a formal pact with Satan, renouncing baptism, spitting on the cross, and dedicating body and soul to the devil's service. Even the witch's familiar, the cat, toad, or raven, was reinterpreted as a demonic gift, marking the contract. This was a dramatic escalation. In older folklore, a cunning person might bargain with a spirit without damning their soul. In medieval grimoires, a ritual magician might command demons by God's names and believe himself protected. But in the theology of the witch hunters, any interaction with a spirit outside the church was treason against heaven. Every charm became a signature on Satan's parchment. Every midnight gathering became a renewal of vows. And yet, the image of the pact was also strangely theatrical. Trial records describe witches kissing the devil's hand or his goat's backside, dancing at Sabbats, or signing books in their own blood. But these confessions were most often extracted under pain and terror. The gap between folklore and court testimony is wide. Was the pact real, or was it an inquisitor's script, forced into the mouths of the accused to justify their destruction? Did these pacts exist, or were they projections of the church's deepest fears, a way to turn every folk rite into proof of a conspiracy with hell? If a pact with the devil was invisible, inked in spirit, signed in blood no court could see, possession was its public theater. Here the devil was not merely whispered about, he was believed to stride inside human skin. As witchcraft panic spread, Europe's courts and pulpits began treating the human body as a battlefield between heaven and hell. Villages, convents, and courtrooms saw scenes that to modern eyes resemble fever dreams. In Loudun, France, an entire convent of Ursuline nuns convulsed, shrieked obscenities, and claimed to be ravished by demons sent by a local priest. In Germany's Würzburg trials, children and adolescents collapsed in fits and accused neighbors of sending spirits into them. In Spain, Italy, and the Low Countries, rural healers who once muttered charms over cattle found themselves accused when those same cattle died, and a girl in the village began to speak in a voice not her own. Symptoms became the stage on which theology performed. The possessed screamed prayers backwards, contorted in impossible postures, spat nails or feathers, claimed to see spirits hovering in the rafters. Physicians and priests recorded cases of sudden strength, aversion to holy objects, or speech in unknown tongues. Whether these were seizures, hysteria, trauma, or performance hardly mattered. To onlookers, they were proof that invisible forces had entered a living host. Exorcisms became public spectacles. Priests brandished relics, sprinkled holy water, read incantations, and interrogated the voices speaking through the afflicted. In some towns, the ritual was as much about reaffirming the church's power as about freeing the victim. A writhing body on the floor was a living canvas upon which sin, heresy, and Satan's reach were painted for all to see. When an exorcism succeeded, when the convulsions ceased, when the voice went silent, it was treated as victory. When it failed, suspicion fell on witches, neighbors, or even on the victim herself. Gender and class shaped these stories. Women, especially nuns or young peasant girls, appeared disproportionately in the records of possession. Their bodies were imagined as more permeable to spirits, their testimonies as both more dramatic and less credible. Poor women became scapegoats, their strange behavior read as evidence of guilt. Upper-class victims could be treated as battlegrounds, their suffering used to justify the pursuit of others. In either case, possession narratives reinforced existing hierarchies: the learned man as exorcist, the poor woman as accused, the female body as a contested site. But possession also blurred categories. Was the afflicted a witch herself, or the devil's victim? Was she a liar, a lunatic, or a living witness to hell? Trial records are full of contradictions. A girl might name a witch as her tormentor, then claim the devil came of his own accord. A nun might accuse a priest, then collapse into silence. Each confession could implicate others, creating spirals of accusation that devoured entire communities. Were these victims bewitched, or were they victims of a different power entirely? Fear, manipulation, and the weight of a society convinced that the devil was already inside. If possession was the devil inside a single body, the Sabbat was the devil's kingdom writ large, an invisible congregation that haunted Europe's imagination. By the late Middle Ages, pamphlets, sermons, and court testimonies began to describe a hidden religion, the witches' Sabbat. In these accounts, witches did not simply cast spells. They gathered en masse at night, far from churches, in clearings, or on mountaintops, to worship Satan himself. These descriptions were astonishingly vivid: bonfires blazing under a black sky, naked dancers circling a horned figure, unbaptized infants sacrificed and eaten. The imagery was a lurid inversion of the Mass, where the church offered bread and wine. The Sabbat was said to offer flesh and poison, where priests raised a chalice, witches raised a toad or a skull. The origins of this imagery were complex. Some of it drew from older pagan festivals: midsummer dances, harvest bonfires, fertility rites, which, when viewed through a demonological lens, could be recast as devil worship. Some came from the confessions of accused witches, extracted under torture, in which interrogators' questions seeded the very details later presented as proof. And some came from the dark imagination of Europe's clerics and artists, who turned whispers into woodcuts and sermons into spectacles. The goat, one of the devil's most famous shapes, likely entered the story because of its long association with fertility and wildness. In court records, the devil appears as a black man, a great cat, a shadowy wind, but again and again he is a goat, seated like a king while witches kneel to kiss him. Whether this image reflects actual folk practice, hallucinatory visions, or an inquisitor's script, it hardened into a visual dogma. By the 16th century, the Sabbat looked the same from Spain to Germany to Scotland, not because it was real, but because the same books and woodcuts spread the same nightmare. Even the flight to the Sabbat, witches soaring on broomsticks, may have roots in more earthly things. Medieval recipes for flying ointments have survived. Salves of herbs such as henbane, belladonna, mandrake, and datura. These plants are rich in tropane alkaloids capable of inducing vivid hallucinations of movement, flying, or shapeshifting. A cunning woman or a folk healer applying such a salve to herself or a client might experience sensations later interpreted as literal flight. Over time, these private, drug-induced visions were woven into public accusation. If witches said they flew in trance, inquisitors recorded it as fact. Pamphlets and woodcuts amplified the panic. Printers in Basel, Nuremberg, and Lyon cranked out lurid illustrations of horned demons presiding over naked covens, of women riding goats through the night sky, of orgies and cannibal feasts. These images circulated faster than any one trial could, creating a uniform picture of witchcraft in Europe's collective imagination. A villager who had never heard of a Sabbat might see a pamphlet and now remember one in their own town. The church's nightmare became the public's reality. The Sabbat, then, is less a window into a secret religion than a mirror of Europe's anxieties, sex, fertility, women's gatherings, and old folk customs, all reinterpreted as a conspiracy of Satan. It allowed authorities to accuse not just an individual, but an entire network, to imagine heresy not as an isolated act, but as a hidden cult undermining Christendom. Was there ever a clandestine cult of Satan, or was the witches' Sabbat a nightmare, painted by propaganda, a tapestry of fears stitched from fragments of folk rites and forced confessions? Strip away the lurid woodcuts and whispered confessions, and a quieter story emerges, one of ordinary hands, not claws. In the dim glow of a hearth, a woman grinds herbs. At a doorway, a charm of iron and salt hangs against misfortune. This was not the devil's Sabbat. This was daily survival. Across medieval Europe, folk magic was woven into life. A sprig of rosemary over the cradle, a knotted cord to ease labor pains, a whispered prayer for a sick cow. These were protections passed down for generations, half Christian and half pagan. Villagers might visit a cunning man for a love charm, a midwife for a birth blessing, or a shepherd for a weather spell before the harvest. These practices were not secret cults, but a patchwork of remedies, incantations, and symbols meant to keep households safe in a dangerous world. Yet in the climate of fear, stoked by demonology, the line between healer and witch grew thin. The same midwife who had delivered a baby at midnight might be accused weeks later of stealing that baby's soul when it sickened. The same herb woman who mixed a potion to help a man sleep might be denounced for poisoning him. A farmer who tied 3 knots in a rope to stop a storm could be hauled before a court for conjuring spirits. As theologians and inquisitors sought diabolical worship everywhere, the familiar became the suspect. Many of these folk practitioners also used Christian symbols, crossing themselves while muttering a spell, invoking saints alongside old gods, wearing crosses and carrying rosaries as charms. But To the inquisitors, this blend was not harmless. It was heresy disguised as piety. Sermons warned that even the most innocent-looking amulet might be a demonic trap. The more effective a healer seemed, the more dangerous she appeared in the eyes of the church. Class and gender sharpened this suspicion. Poor women, widows, and outsiders lacked the protection of powerful patrons and so made easy targets. In some regions, accusations of witchcraft spiked precisely during times of famine or plague, moments when people most desperately sought magical help, and then, when help failed, sought someone to blame. What was truly practiced and what was projected onto these practitioners became impossible to untangle. Court records show a mix of remedies, rumors, and fantasies written down as evidence. A single charm could be described as both a blessing and a curse, depending on who testified. A midwife's herbal poultice could be reframed as a satanic salve. In some villages, the same woman was lauded as a wise healer and, days later, marched to trial as a soul stealer. In some villages, the same woman who delivered babies was accused of stealing souls, a reminder that the line between folk magic and forbidden worship was drawn not by witches, but by those who feared them. Once everyday charms had been recast as diabolical, the courtroom became the theater where Europe staged its war with the devil. Here, belief hardened into verdict, and the accused were forced to act out the fears of their accusers. Across the continent, from small Alpine hamlets to the Atlantic ports, witch trials became a grim ritual. Local magistrates or visiting inquisitors summoned suspects, sometimes on the strength of a single rumor, a neighbor's illness, or a child's dream. The accused were almost always ordinary people, healers, widows, the poor, the odd, dragged into a space designed not to discover truth, but to extract confession. The mechanics were chillingly systematic. Interrogations began with questions about charms or strange behavior, but soon spiraled to theology. When did you renounce Christ? When did the devil mark you? What was done at the Sabbat? Because a true pact with Satan was invisible, the only way to prove it was to make the accused say it, and so words wrung from terror became the devil's signature. Torture was the accelerant. In the dungeons of Würzburg, Bamberg, and countless lesser towns, racks stretched bodies until shoulders tore, thumbscrews crushed fingers, ropes hoisted suspects into the air until their joints gave way. Sleep deprivation, starvation, and the mere threat of execution broke down resistance. Under such conditions, even the innocent confessed, repeating the stories inquisitors had been feeding them for decades. A black goat, a midnight flight, a pact signed in blood. In some cases, entire communities became complicit. At Loudun in France, nuns fell into convulsions and accused a priest of bewitching them. His trial became a public spectacle, his execution a moral lesson. In Salem, Massachusetts, a century later and across an ocean, young girls' accusations ignited a spiral of hangings and imprisonments that echoed Europe's earlier frenzies. In Würzburg, children as young as 9 were burned, their confessions citing Sabbats they could scarcely have imagined without coaching. The pattern was always the same: a whispered suspicion, an arrest, questions shaped by manuals like the Malleus Maleficarum, a confession that confirmed the inquisitor's beliefs, an execution that cleansed the community. Truth, delusion, survival, all blurred. Some confessions read like nightmares, women claiming to fly, men claiming to copulate with demons, children naming entire villages as Satan's servants. Whether these were fantasies induced by torture, hallucinations from herbs, or performances meant to end suffering, they hardened into evidence that the devil's conspiracy was real. By the time the stake was lit, the accused had already been transformed from neighbor into monster, not by any spell of their own, but by the combined incantations of law, fear, and power. Confessions of pacts and sabbats, truth, delusion, or desperate survival under pain. In the firelit courts of Europe, belief in the devil did not just judge the accused, it created them. The flames of the stakes have died. The inquisitors are long buried, yet their shadows still stretch across our imagination. Every Halloween mask, every horror film, every whispered story of a pact owes something to those dark centuries. When the trials ended, the idea of the witch bound to the devil didn't vanish. It mutated. In the 20th century, scholars, mystics, and seekers began looking back at the fragments of pre-Christian folklore buried under centuries of demonology. Out of this excavation came new movements, Wicca, neo-paganism, modern witchcraft, that sought to reclaim the word witch as a title of power rather than a mark of shame. In these circles, the devil has no place. There is no goat-headed master, no midnight oath. Instead, there are nature rites, seasonal festivals, and a return to the cycles of earth, once demonized by the church. Yet, even as witches shed the devil held on to witches in popular culture. Painters of the 19th century still depicted horned sabbats. Victorian penny dreadfuls retold true accounts of demon lovers, and in the 20th and 21st centuries, the devil became a pop icon, a rock and roll anti-hero, a logo, a Halloween prop. The goat's head and inverted pentagram are now as likely to appear on a t-shirt or an Instagram profile as on an inquisitor's parchment. What was once terror has been reborn as aesthetic. But that aesthetic carries a ghost of history. The horned figure on stage, the inverted cross in a music video, the witch influencer on TikTok, all draw unconsciously on images crafted under torture and fear. The devil, who once justified executions, now sells movies, books, and hashtags, his image a currency of rebellion rather than damnation. Still, when we hear stories of possession, curses, or secret cults, a flicker of the old dread lingers. The archetype is too potent to die, and so we stand in a paradox. The witch as a self-chosen identity, the devil as a marketing tool, yet both rooted in a time when accusations of their union could burn a person alive. Our fascination is not just nostalgia. It is the echo of an older fear, one we have dressed up but not truly left behind. From heresy to hashtag, from the pyre to the profile picture, the devil still shapes our image of the witch, and the witch still shapes our idea of the forbidden. Pacts, possessions, forbidden worship. For centuries, these words were enough to condemn a neighbor, a healer, a stranger at the edge of the village. They were not just stories. They were instruments shaping fear, shaping power, shaping the line between belonging and exile. All through our journey, we have watched how myth and reality entwined. Everyday charms turned into evidence of diabolical worship, whispered accusations hardened into confessions, the devil's image evolving from terror to icon. To understand this history is to see how ideas about evil can be used, to explain, to punish, to control. It's a mirror we hold up to our own time. What hidden forces do we still accuse others of harboring? What fears still need a scapegoat? The devil of witchcraft trials may have faded into pop culture, but his shadow remains wherever suspicion becomes certainty and belief becomes a weapon. When we speak of selling one's soul or joke about a deal with the devil, we are echoing centuries of pain, spectacle, and fascination. Which part of the witch's story haunts you most? Do you believe pacts with the devil were ever real? Or were they weapons of control disguised as morality? We invite you to share your thoughts in the comments. Your insights and legends could shape a future investigation. And if you crave more journeys into history's darkest corridors, more whispers from the edge of firelight, subscribe and join us, because the story of witchcraft and the devil isn't over. The night still holds many more secrets,